2024 was a wild year in the world of gaming, and one of the most interesting stories is Balatro. It's a poker-themed game by an indie company. It's won a ton of awards, and it's Canadian. Today on the podcast, Balatro and the highs and lows of gaming in 2024. Hey, I'm Ali Hassan, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. It's been a roller coaster of a year for the video game industry. There were job losses, a video game actors strike, but there were also a lot of games that took off and had people really talking. Jonathan Orr and Camille Salazar Hadaway are both here. Hello to you both.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Hello.
So let's start with last week's Game Awards, and it was a bright spot for Canada's video game industry with this game, Balatro.
And the Game Award goes to Balatro.
I appreciate that, but none of us are local thunk. While he's not one for the spotlight, he does like to shine his spotlight on other games that he thinks deserve equal recognition. So not only wants to recognize all nominees tonight, but also all indie games that were launched this year that might have flown under the radar.
Balatro. That's my tomato of the gaming world. That was Wouter van Halderen accepting the award for Best Debut Indie Game on behalf of game developer Local Thunk, who was the developer of Balatro. And Balatro took home more than just that. They took home Best Independent and Best Mobile Game. John, tell me, why is this so exciting?
I think it was really fun because Balatro is not really the kind of game you see getting a whole bunch of honors at the Game Awards. Usually it's not a gigantic high budget game. It's not something with multi-million billion dollar Unreal Engine 5 graphics. It's a very simple card game at its core. It's also amazing that an independent game was nominated alongside huge games for Game of the Year. Like it was alongside an Elden Ring expansion, a Final Fantasy game. It was really the little indie game that could. Canadian representation is always appreciated at the Game Awards, considering certainly Europe, Japan, the United States has such huge presence at the Game Awards. And it also meant that as a Game of the Year nominee, we got an orchestrated version of its very funky theme song.
It's also got a very, very interesting origin story as well. Can you tell us a little bit about how this game came to be?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a ton we know because the creator, a single creator named who goes by the name Local Thunk, we don't know his real name. He has never gone really public in any of his interviews. The idea is that he had been working on some other things at the time, but thought he would just make a fun card game for like 6 friends a few years ago. He didn't really have any idea that it would become such a huge thing once it came out. And yeah, it's just a really great small creator story of a game like this just kind of blowing up and everybody in the game space just really acknowledging what an incredible amount of design went into this game. Again, against the waves of like gigantic blockbuster AAA games.
Sure. And to further this, he doesn't have any interest in it being a huge blockbuster. He doesn't want it to be in the casinos and all that, which is so indie and Canadian at the same time. Camille, it's
actually really important.
Yeah, no, go ahead, John.
I should just mention that like he was so Local Thing was so against making it a game like with microtransactions or real money gambling elements. He actually says he wrote it into his will that even after he's passed, like the game will never be turned into a gambling game.
Wow. Camille, you were at the Game Awards. Now,
Yes.
I watched some of the awards. This is a major award show on the scale of like a Hollywood award show. What is it like to be there?
I mean, it's the 10th anniversary of the Game Awards. It was a wild show, to say the least, a jam-packed room at the Peacock Theater. And, it is also very Canadian. Yes, we have that Balatro shine and spotlight, but also it is produced by Jeff Keighley, who's a Canadian video game talent from Markham, Ontario, Markham Rep. I'm from there as well. And it's been now this huge gathering point for the industry, especially as we lose shows like E3 and conferences that bring the community together. So it is definitely standout. You have Snoop Dogg there performing for the first time. He's announcing his debut game studio with his son. You're having Harrison Ford appear to talk about the games that he loves, and Indiana Jones that also just came out as well. So it is definitely a celebrity affair at the Game Awards, but more importantly, it is the place for the community to come together to celebrate all things that you love. And you see that with wins like Balatro, where it's really the community that is speaking for the games that they love. And you're seeing these little indies that could.
Yeah, it's very interesting, the juxtaposition of all these suits and tuxedos and then the love for the indie game. Tell me why you think it's such a fun game to play.
Yeah, Balatro, I think the reason why it stands out, it is the standard, 52 deck that you start off with, but then you could also add enhanced 52 deck cards. So it's familiar, I think, for a lot of people that may not be used to video games and more virtual card games, but it is not necessarily, like John said, a gambling game. It has elements of virtual card games like Magic or Pokemon, where deck building is a huge part of that, and figuring out what deck works for you in different situations is important. So it's a lot of strategy that plays into it. And again, it is that classic example of word of mouth. I think, when this game was starting, you had the developer that just put this out on Reddit. Hey, I created this game for some friends. Play it. Hopefully you have some fun. And people did have fun. And it didn't have big marketing dollars, but the community really pushed it through word of mouth to make it as successful as it is.
Sure. So related to that, John, Balatro was just one of the few indie games that we've seen make a splash. Why do you think that we're seeing more and more of these indie or auteur game designers publishing projects finding success?
I mean, that's a fascinating question, because historically, the designers of games have not really been the names behind the games. Usually people talk about, I want to talk about I want to see Ubisoft next game, or I want to see Rockstar's in game. We talk about the studios, and weirdly enough, the executives are the names that we hear about more than the creators. We hear about Phil Spencer more than we do the heads of their studios. There are some exceptions, like Hideo Kojima of Metal Gear Solid, and Neil Druckmann from The Last of Us, maybe because they just roll in Hollywood circles.
Sure.
The indie developers, they're able to kind of get their voice out because they are they're not shackled by corporate strategy. They can go out there, talk on social media, get the word out for their games by themselves, so their personality shines out. But I would also note that for every local thunk who's become this kind of like a celebrity, there's maybe 100 indie devs who don't really grab that global attention. It's an attention economy problem, right? So there are a lot of games that maybe sink or swim based on the whims of the algorithm, and that's always difficult. So I think certainly Local Thunk and Balatro are very deserving games and creators for that attention, but it's also it's a huge swath of games coming out there that are also fighting for that attention, and maybe get 35 copies sold as opposed to 3.5 million.
Right. Camille, what have you noticed in that world of these auteur and indie? Yeah.
Yeah, I would also say I think the layoffs that have been happening in the industry for the past, 2-3 years, the significant layoffs has also played into that. You see a lot of developers that are in between homes at studios that are making, these projects that are hopefully more passion projects. We hear a lot about tech companies like Google, who also has a lot of their employees just work on passion projects, and sometimes those are the ideas that actually do better than the corporate driven ideas. And I think we're seeing that as well. With the games industry and with indie developers as well. You have games like Helldivers, who's technically an indie game that has fun and kind of internalizes all things we love about Starship Troopers, but it's caught the eyes of these huge publishers and Sony and PlayStation, and became a huge hit against all odds.
Yeah, you mentioned the layoffs. I think briefly we should just talk about this, opposite these games, thriving. You've had these massive layoffs. John, I wanted to ask you about this. There was a game called Concord, right?
There was a game called Concord, yes.
Very short-lived game.
Very short-lived, and it has become this case study for a larger phenomenon. Tell me a little bit about what happened to the game.
Yeah, so Concord was debuted and promoted as kind of like the next big multiplayer online shooter. I think it was like a third-person hero shooter. Had a really high budget trailer that kind of positioned its characters as like this off-brand Guardians of the Galaxy. Had a lot of flavor of other popular games like Overwatch or Apex Legends. Camille, correct me if I'm a little bit off center there. But yeah, it didn't really hit. It was apparently okay, according to the people who played it. But when it launched, it seems as though it didn't hit the numbers of people playing it that Sony and the other suits were hoping for. And it actually was taken offline like 2 or 3 weeks after it launched.
Yeah.
And only a couple months later, the entire studio behind it was essentially shut down and they were out of jobs. So yeah, it was incredibly fast rise and fall, and kind of showed that it seems as though games are under a huge amount of pressure to become the next big thing really fast, which, problematic for several reasons.
Sure. If you're just joining us, I'm Ali Hassan, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud on Commotion. I've got Jonathan Orr and Camille Salazar Hadaway with me. Camille, let's talk about this. Let's get back to games themselves. Just in the 2.5 minutes we have left, I wanted to ask you, what would you say the most popular or talked about game in 2024 was? And also, what's a recommendation you might have for a game?
Oh, that's a really tough question, because despite all the layoffs, the games themselves, it was a standout year for video games and the games that came out. I think for many reasons, The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom is a game that was a standout for a lot of people, because you have over 38 years of the Legend of Zelda history of franchise that is beloved by a lot of gamers. Mostly, I think a lot of gamers, it's probably the first game that they played, or next to a Mario game, right? And one of the things that the community has been asking about is playing as the princess herself, Princess Zelda. This game actually allowed it. It was rumored for a very long time. Fans were waiting for it, and they managed to do it in the cutest way possible while incorporating the physics that's based off of Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, 2 games that were huge successes for Nintendo as well. So, I mean, that's definitely a standout. I would say play that, but also if you want to go back and escape, all the stresses of adulthood and maybe go back to all the things that you love from being a kid, Astrobot, who took home Game of the Year, is that game to revisit and play as well, because it is an homage to all the platformers that came past, games like Mario, as well as Super Monkey Ball. If you've played any of those games or remember playing games like Crash Bandicoot as a kid, Astrobot is going to encompass all of that and more.
Okay, John, I saw you nodding your head along with pretty much everything that Camille said there. So I'm giving you 45 seconds. I'm so sorry, to give us a recommendation of a game. What's your pick? What should people be spending more time playing?
Okay, that's enough. That's enough for 2. One is The Rise of the Golden Idol, an incredible point-and-click adventure game. It kind of reinvents that genre to make it a wonderful murder mystery or supernatural mystery kind of detective game. It's like a Mad Lib solution. If you stare at a screen for like half an hour, suddenly it clicks and you become the world's greatest detective. Something else which is a little bit weirder, off the beaten path, Stalker 2: Heart of Chernobyl. It's a game, it's a very difficult technical game, but it's kind of a miracle it came out because it was made by a studio in Ukraine during the war.
For those who can't see, Camille also shaking her head, nodding in agreement vociferously. Thank you both for your time. Appreciate you both being here. Jonathan Orr is a writer and editor for CBC Radio Digital in Toronto. Camille Salazar Hadaway is gaming and esports host and a producer of the podcast Autosave.